Use gestures that are appropriate for each device and platform. You don't always need multi-touch. Not everybody gives you multi-touch. So, a Connect, you've got crazy hand-waving gestures. Take advantage of them. But when you go onto the iPad, use the ones that are appropriate for that. And I think, certainly for this conference, look for opportunities to leverage multiple screens together in new and interesting ways that will enhance learning. And I think part of that is through shared experience. And I think Chad also mentioned this earlier. The market is moving very fast. It's always going to change. It's going to change faster. Just be ready to adapt. Be flexible. I always used to say semper gummi, right? Always flexible. You can't predict what Apple is going to do. You can try. You can't necessarily definitely predict what Google is going to do, or turn off tomorrow, or turn on, or who knows. So just be ready to adapt your application. With updating over the air and things like that, there's no longer the 12-month deployment cycle associated with mobile applications and testing in 82 versions of J2ME, thankfully. We can deploy an Android app and send it out to the market, and now that they're doing automatic updates for people, they're just going to get your updated app the next day. So change it, revise it, keep adapting to the market. Cool. Questions? That was me. Any questions? Thoughts? Sure.
You had mentioned narrowing in on the benchmark and making sure that you really target what platform you want to design for, what device you want to design for. And you had said, well, if they wanted to work on everything, just to make a website. But I had done something that was for a game.
Okay.
It would be on multiple devices. So how have you dealt with trying to explain to clients and then to redesign every different size, and how have you dealt with that?
I think part of it, that's a great question. The question, if everybody here, if you're designing for a client, they say, I want everything. And you're designing something like a game that's relatively specific to the given size or gesture or processor hardware constraints, things like that. What do you say back to them if you say design a website? Flash-based game, one word? No. I think that you can, part of it's about getting them to come to the realization that they have a benchmark too at some level. I think that if someone says, I want a honeycomb app today, I would strongly question why they would, unless they're going to deploy 1,000 honeycomb tablets to people in their organization, or that market is so small right now. It might be bigger in 6 months. I think it will be bigger in 6 months, but it won't be as big as the iPad. So say, well, why don't we start with the iPad app? Let's figure that one out. Let's get that designed. And then let's design the honeycomb one, because it's going to be just a slight bit different. From a development standpoint, I know that's not easier. It's no easier. I can't answer that. I think there's going to be some topics about that today, though. But I definitely would say, try to start with something first, because that's going to allow you to learn from it. And again, if you start with everything, it makes it a lot harder. But there are different games that you probably could do as a mobile website, depending on the kind of game. Angry Birds might not work as well as gestures and whatnot. But certainly a card game, or even just simple questions, quizzes, things like that, they tend to work pretty well as web apps too. And then you actually can deploy it on the web and benefit from that audience as well.
Just a comment that this raises the issue of complexity. At this stage we're at in the market, there's a huge number of choices, and we're not going to choose everything.
Right.
But the problem is there's an assumption that we're going to use the user's devices. But that's one choice, because your other corporate training strategy would be to say we're going to standardize on X, right? And that you have harder to do that if you're going to buy it, right? And decide this is going to be the company's standard. And maybe that's the best strategy, because you also want to worry about security, and you want to make sure that it doesn't leave the office at 5 o'clock or whatever. So I think this is a picture that is half right in the sense that many people are looking at using everybody's devices. On the other hand, there are people that are solving this by standardizing. So, any comments?
Yeah. So I think the standardization I think it primarily from an enterprise standpoint.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely happening, and I think that, you know, BlackBerry as an enterprise standard has been kind of the gold standard for enterprise for a while for mobile devices, and I'm not sure that Android will become that next standard. I don't know that BlackBerry may stay around as a standard, at least for another year or two. But I see Windows definitely trying to attack BlackBerry's market there, and provide a operating system and application development platform for people that is scalable between devices. The Windows 8 launched the other day about, you know, tablet experiences that are similar to the phone experiences. Is a little bit easier for developers, and I think designers too, because it's similar interactions. But if you're going to deploy an application to something, I would certainly look at the target. And again, you can narrow your target if you know what you're deploying in the enterprise. And hopefully, you can nudge the folks that are doing IT deployments for you, to point to things that are going to be good platforms for, you know, mobile learning and other types of experiences that people want to have. And I think the notion of applications on a shop floor or, you know, in a warehouse or something like that, moving those to tablets and other types of devices is certainly a great way to increase mobility. And as long as you can target what those are, you can deliver really fantastic experiences, because you don't have to deploy to every version of Android, every version of iOS. And actually, you can control when they get upgraded. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that, a lot more corporate customers moving to smartphones and iPhones and Android phones in particular. Any other questions?
What about screen orientation? If you turn your phone to the side, are you comfortable with bringing some of those sort of larger screen interface design elements into the phone when you not have livable audio?
Sure. So the question was, as we turn devices landscape, how can do we reorient the objects on the screen? Do we bring in large screen interface elements to those experiences? I think it depends, and I'm sorry that's a bad answer. You know, again, it gets back to some of the screen size questions. If you're a 3.7 HDPI or a 3.1 or 3.5 NDPI device, I might not suggest something like that. And I think the other thing to consider is the height of the display. So, you know, in a larger display, I'm going to get more objects I can read vertically, and it can be nice to have a little bit, you have a kind of a shorter line length. So, like, emails are easier to read because they're not taking up the whole display, or form elements, you know, you don't have form fields that are stretched across the whole screen. So I think there are some benefits to employing kind of multi-column strategies, but taking it kind of wholesale from a tablet down into the smaller devices may not be as good. But I think if you look at the 4.7 or 4.5 tablet devices, there's definitely some room there, particularly ones that don't have you know, the on-screen keyboards, or I think that's one area that's interesting with Honeycomb. They moved the status bar to the bottom and include some other actions in the Chrome. And I'm interested to see what they do in Ice Cream Sandwich to see what they do with the whole status thing. Because in landscape, it's really kind of a pain. You lose a lot of real estate to the status bar, particularly on the smaller screens, because they need to stay a good touch target size for notifications. So. Yeah, I think there are some things, like the way you navigate to accounts from portrait to landscape on the iPad in Mail, for example, or maybe the Guild application has some of those things. You can, when you rotate a landscape, having your accounts on the side and active and always available, so there's I think a pretty good solution. It doesn't necessarily require a long line length or half split display or anything like that. And when you go portrait, there's a place form there too. I think that's a pretty good solution.